Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this Unity video we're going to be talking about how to build a menu screen on top of the UI canvas. Now this is going to be the manual from scratch way, so I'm calling it the hard way, and in the next video we'll be using the Game Jam template, which you can pick up on the asset store, as a base to build up from. But if you want to learn how to do things the manual way from scratch, this is going to be the video for you. So what we're going to be looking for here in the UI menu is that we can activate it by hitting a button such as escape on our keyboard in order to open it up and show it to the player. And in that menu we would have several buttons which can do things like open other menus or start the game, kind of whatever you want it to do, but all of those buttons should be located inside of a singular menu. So in order to get started with this, we're going to be creating a stack of game objects on top of the canvas. And I'm going to say that the top one should be a panel. So the panel game object is basically a background rendered color. You can also use a different source image if you have basically a different border that you want or a specific background. So for this UI panel, we're not going to want it to take up the entire screen, and we don't want it to stretch too much when we change from, say, a 4:3 screen ratio to a 16:9. So here I'm going to select from the anchor presets, and we're going to center it in the middle. So Shift and Alt to set the pivot, the position, and also the anchor point. And then we're going to shrink the size of the width and height. So let's try getting it to a modest setting, such as 400 width by 300 height. Now, when you're actually setting its specific sizing up for the game, it's going to get a bit more complicated, but this should work for now. So now in this panel, we have a image script, which is using the default background UI image, and it's got a color, which is partially transparent. So in order for it to fit the game a little bit more, I'm going to change this to more of a gray, and maybe we'll increase the alpha to about 180. And when you're designing your UI or you're having someone design it for you, there's a good chance you're going to want borders or something like that there. So you would swap the source image out here for another one. This is just for a very cut and dry UI that's purely functional. So in addition to this panel, which we can rename to something like menu screen, would be a good idea, we can add new elements onto it. So for instance, we might want a couple buttons. So I will add a couple buttons to this menu. And right now they're all positioned in the exact center of that UI element. Now we could manually move them, but if you have manual settings for all of the locations of these, it's going to cause issues when you resize your menu, and things might get out of place or just not look good. So another component that we can add on to this menu screen game object is going to be a grid layout group, which will be able to take these basically sub-game objects and organize them in basically a way that we set, with specific margins, specific sizing for each of the game elements, and I think it works pretty well for buttons. So we add the grid layout group, and you can see it immediately changes the position on them, changes the size on them. But it's not exactly what we want there. We're probably going to want to change that. And actually, in order to make sure that this grid layout group only affects these buttons, I'm going to add a new empty game object to the game menu. And I'm going to copy this grid layout component into the new game object. I'm going to paste component values there. I'm going to remove it from the menu screen. And now we're going to put these buttons down here under this game object. So what this does is it makes sure that this game object is responsible for controlling the buttons beneath it, but if we add something else like a title to the menu screen, it's not going to try to add that to the grid layout group. In other words, the grid layout group only manages the buttons, and that's it. So I'm going to call this something like button manager. Okay, and now we're going to want to set these settings up. So rect transform, probably going to want that to be more like in the center. And now we can set the cell size. I'm pretty sure we're going to want the Y to be a lot smaller than the X, so maybe knock that down to 30. We're going to want some spacing between the buttons, so I'll add that there. We'll leave the start axis as horizontal so that these buttons are top to bottom. If we change that to vertical, You'll see that as long as there's space, it'll try to put them horizontal instead, but we do want a horizontal menu here. And for now, I think everything else we can leave roughly the same. Maybe I'll make the buttons just a little bit bigger. And for the child alignment, I'll change it to the center so that it is equal on both sides. So now we can start customizing those buttons. I'll click on button 1, and remember that there's also a text element underneath it. We'll actually change the text first, so maybe the first one should be options. The last one can be exit game. And the second one can be anything else, maybe another options menu or credits. You probably wouldn't put credits in your escape menu, but just for placeholder purposes, we'll keep it there like that. Now, to make it obvious what this screen actually is, let's put another text element under the menu screen. So UI text, and we're going to want to position that at the top. So anchor presets Control-Alt-Shift. We'll change the color to a white and give it a best fit so that it can be a lot larger if there's space for it. And for the text itself, we'll call it pause menu. And maybe we even want to have it expand, and let's center that so that it's consistent with the rest of the menu. And there we have a title for our menu. Now let's make it so that when we click on the options button, it's actually going to open up another menu called our options menu. So I'm going to create a new panel here. And with this panel, I will center it with manual sizing again. So maybe 300 here for size. And under this panel, we'll add a couple of sliders. So let's say sliders for audio volume, including music and sound, something that most games are going to want to have. So once again, we can create a grid layout group for these sliders. So UI, or actually just create empty. We'll call it slider group. Add a grid layout component to it, grid layout group component to it. Add the sliders in there, and we're definitely going to want to customize the size of those sliders, so they should be large, horizontally speaking, but pretty small vertically. And we're also going to want those to center, so upper center or middle center should work fine. Now we do have slider elements, but they don't have any text saying what it actually is, so I think we should add a UI text element to both of those like we did in the slider video. So this is going to be basically the label for the slider, which is going to say audio volume, its current volume, and then its total volume. So let's do sound volume first, and some placeholder text, 0 out of 100. And now we're going to need to organize that. So one thing I'm going to do is go back to the slider group, and we're going to give them some spacing vertically because they're way too clumped up right now. And with this first slider, I'm going to move the text relative to the position of the original slider. So I think if we put it in the bottom left-hand corner of this slider for position-wise, and then move it down by -20 or -25, that should work out well. And now we can copy this component over to the other slider. So copy paste. Make sure it's actually in the slider. And it has the same position presets. So what we can do actually is take the rect transform of the first one, copy that component, go over to the new text, and paste the component values so that it's in the same position relative to the parent. And now we can change the text to music volume. And let's actually go ahead and disable the menu screen behind it for right now so that we can actually see what we're doing here. Maybe we want a little bit less alpha, or more alpha so that it's less transparent for this screen. And that doesn't look too bad. What we're going to want to do now is probably add our text update script, the one for sliders, to this slider, so slider value, and we can take the text, we can take the slider, let's see, where's the slider? There it is. And we can do the same thing down here. So slider value. And the slider component, the text component. And that way it should update the text for these text components based on the value in the slider. But in order for that to work, we're going to need to do a couple more things. One is going to be to change the min value and the max value to reflect more of a 1 to 100 level, or a 0 to 100. And I'll make it whole numbers so that only integers are possible. We'll do the same thing over here. Another way to have done this would probably have been to just create one slider component as a game object, add the text element, and then copied it over. You can create a prefab that you can just basically copy over and over again into your scene. Basically, you can create a prefab folder. So if we create a folder called prefab, you could just drag the slider game object into here, and then you would have this as the base settings. You put it in your scene, and then you customize it. Okay, so now it's mostly going to be working, but there's one problem, which is script specific. So the slider value script, currently, I have it set to have a very specific stringed text, but we actually want to give it the option to have whatever text we want as this first part here. So I'm going to create a new public variable that's of type string, and we're going to call it prefix, I guess. Yeah, that makes some sense. So what it's going to do is replace this HP string with whatever the prefix is, regardless of whether it's set or not. A default string should just be basically no characters and a couple quotation marks, so it won't affect this negatively if we don't have anything set. But now we'll be able to set whatever we want there, whether that's sound volume or HP or anything else. It gives the script more flexibility, and that's what we want, to be able to reuse it if possible. So here we're going to want sound volume. And note, I'm adding one extra space at the end there so that the 0 out of 100 doesn't get clumped up. And we'll do the same thing over here for the other slider. So music volume, then an extra space. And let's go ahead and test this in game. So I'm just going to leave this menu up. There's nothing to trigger it. It'll just be there by default. Okay, and we have a typo, but in general, it's working just fine there. So let's fix that typo real quick. Okay, great. So I'll also add a text to the top of this one, and we'll call it options menu. We'll make sure it's at the top and stretched horizontally. Center it, give it best fit, and that'll do for right now. Also, I'll put it at the top for just organizational purposes. Okay, so let's test the slider itself out. We can't actually press down on it because interactability is enabled. So if we go ahead and change this value, it is updating, and you can see it updates in the text below. But the problem is there's not enough space. So when we have larger numbers, it gets truncated off of the end there. So there's a couple options to this. One would be to set the text element to overflow. Another would just be to simply expand it. We'll do both here. Rather than wrap, we'll have it overflow. And let's test it out by hitting play again. Okay. So the bottom one's working fine, but we forgot to set whole numbers on the top. Let's fix that as well. So check whole numbers so that you don't have any floating point numbers. And yeah, that's great for a very, very, very basic options menu that isn't linked up to anything. So let's disable that. And now what we want to do is make it so that this main pause menu, the options button actually opens up the options menu. The secondary options menu anyway. So unclick for this button. We're adding an event in. We're going to take this panel game object, and I'm going to set it to active, which should make that come on top. But I'm actually going to do one more thing, which is when this button gets clicked, I'm going to take this main menu screen and I'm going to set it to inactive. And the reason for that is so that we don't have two menu screens showing on screen at the same time. So when we actually go into the game mode, you'll notice right here that the buttons aren't clickable. It did take me a few minutes to figure this out, but the reason this is happening is that there is a canvas element directly attached to this menu screen. There should only be one canvas inside of your game, or any scene in your game anyway, and that should be the top level canvas game object. So we're going to remove that there. so that it's not messing with that. And we'll go back into play mode, and these buttons should work now. Okay, so I can press on that, and if I press on this and basically stop holding it, the options menu pops up, and the main game menu disappears, which is basically what we want. Now, probably you want to also put in something like a X button in the top right, close menu, or something like that for both of those screens. But I think the last thing we'll do for this video, because there's an easier way to do all this menu stuff, is to make it so that when we hit a key like escape on our keyboard, it actually opens up this menu screen. So what we'll do is, for the menu screen, I will add a new script, which is going to be, we'll call it escape to menu. C# script, create an add, and we'll open that up in Visual Studio or your editor of choice. So edit script. So what we're going to want to put here is if input dot get key down, and then we're going to need to be basically key code dot escape, and I'll clean that up in a little bit. So if that holds true, then we need to open the referenced menu. So in that case, we'll make it the game object. So menu game object, menu set active true. Okay, so in this case, it seems like I need to reopen this so that it can start getting the references to the Unity stuff. So I'll go ahead and save this, and let's open escape to menu back up from within Unity, and this should boot into Visual Studio, and hopefully it'll be able to get references to the Unity input library this time. Okay, so Visual Studio is properly linked now, and it already picked up on the import library and the game object reference, so that's good. We need to change this key code to properly get escape, so it's .escape, not .esc. And set active, I believe the first letter of that needs to be capitalized, because it's a method call. Okay, and that game object should be public, not private. The reason for that is so that we can actually set it in the inspector. So if the key code is down, it's going to set the menu to active, and that should work at a very, very, very basic level. So let's go back over to Unity, and let's see. Probably want to attach that script to the main menu screen game object, which it already is. So we're going to take the menu screen itself as a game object and reference that as the game object within the script. Another way I guess you could do it, even simpler, is just to do game object.setActive, because as a model behavior script, it already knows what game object it's attached to. So that's probably even simpler. So that menu game object thing, that's not necessary, really. Okay, let's actually go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to disable it. By default, note that it's still in the scene, it's just disabled as a game object. We'll hit play, and now we'll hit escape to open the menu up. And it's not working. Okay, so let's do a little bit of debugging here. I'm going to set a breakpoint there, attach it to Unity, and let's figure this out. So we'll see if it even hits that breakpoint. So escape. Okay, actually I know what's going on. This script isn't able to run because the game object it's attached to is disabled. So what we actually need to do is move this script over to something like the event system, and we'll attach it over here as a new script. So escape to menu, and we'll remove it over here. And as it turns out, in this case, because we're not trying to activate this game object, the event system, I'll go ahead and add the reference back in. So public game object menu, then menu.setActive equals true. Yep, that should be good. And now we just need to point to the menu we want to activate. So menu screen as the game object. And now let's go ahead and try it. Now the script of course doesn't have to be attached to the event system. Just any game object in the scene that's always going to be active. So let's try it again, hit escape, and it opens up properly. So my bad on that one. So the pause menu. We have the options button, which when we click it, should still open the secondary menu, the options menu, and it does, great. Now, you'd probably want to add some more stuff in, like if you hit escape when the menu is already open, it closes it, or a button up here, or that kind of thing. But we're going to stop there for this video. In the next one, we'll be taking a look at the Game Jam menu template, which gives you a head start on everything you've seen here. So if you want to have something just kind of prepared for you, this should be pretty nice, but we'll get into that in the next video once again. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys in my future Unity content.